Okay, so can I first ask you for your questions for this, please? Yes?
Do you think your rebel's indictment was fair considering Bradley Manning he nearly got the death sentence for doing pretty much the same thing as you were landed?
I don't think it was fair, just because what he was trying to do was try and inform the public. And obviously he was sort of charged for doing what's right for the people, so no, I don't think it was fair.
Well, when it comes to something that America is doing something in Israel.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, so it comes to something where America is doing something worse than Israel.
Okay, yes.
If you yourself were a journalist and you were set the task of reporting on Israel, would you be happy to do so, or would you feel uncomfortable or threatened?
I guess there's more than one factor to take into account, really, then. Obviously it's your welfare, but it's your duty, I guess, to report on what's going on in the world, so if you've got to do that, then yeah, I would.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Considering Gaza is technically its own country, does Gaza have its own newspaper or media outlet?
I don't actually know that. I didn't really look into Gaza. It's up to Israel.
Okay, yes.
The Arab Spring, when it was developing, obviously had quite a large impact on countries surrounding Israel. Did it have any influence directly on Israel?
I don't know that either. I didn't look into that.
Okay, any other questions? No? Questions from Matthew, please? Yes?
In your opinion, do you agree that social media is blocked in China, or do you think it shouldn't be?
In my opinion, it depends, because so many of the generations of the Chinese people have been subjugated by communist rule, it's almost as if they don't know any better. I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't have Facebook, but it would be very interesting to see the reactions of individual people. And considering Chinese people that live in other countries that are entitled to Facebook, I wonder what they would think of their own relatives that may live in mainland China, you know what I mean?
Yeah, surely they should have the choice to pick themselves whether they want to use it or not, rather than block it altogether.
Yeah, I could see perhaps maybe the Chinese government creating its own official government-approved form of Facebook. Perhaps.
They've got something similar. I think it might have something similar already. I think it might have its own version of Facebook, so got friendly over there.
Well, if it has its own official version, then perhaps people could sort of, like how they view Google Catch and other things, sort of hack into official Chinese Facebook and interlink that with regular, normal brand Facebook.
Any other questions from Matthew? Yes?
Do you think it'll ever get to the point where China will embrace foreign media and allow them less restricted access?
That's a very tricky question, because China presents itself what it only wants foreign people to see, and we do not know how truly the Chinese government system and the Chinese people actually operate. They just give out the mass propaganda and what we commonly accept as China and the Chinese people. So I cannot really say whether they will fully embrace foreign media, because they might go native as if it were.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Matthew?
You gave us your prediction about China sort of slowly and painfully moving towards a capitalist model. What role do you see journalists playing in that transition?
What role? Well, I could possibly see those journalists that have been granted clemency and freedom to live in other countries, like that blind person that I mentioned, could form a consortium of other journalists. That way promote that the West isn't that bad, and perhaps you should keep more of an open mind about the West in general.
Thank you. Yes.
To what extent does the Red Book influence journalism in China?
The Red Book is sort of a more symbolic relic of how great and how free China became under Mao's rule, even though there is a lot to suggest the contrary of that. And very much like Korea, Chairman Mao is a lot like Kim Jong-un, in that they have almost attained a divine status, and in China you can visit Chairman Mao in his coffin, just like Lenin in Russia, where you can actually see his body in the coffin and everything.
Any other questions? No? Questions for Nana, please? Yes?
Do you think China could afford to loosen its restrictions, or is the censorship necessary to the entirety of the 1.4 billion people staying one useful country?
I think they could loosen the restrictions but even though there is 1.4 billion people, there still needs to be some restrictions on it so that people don't try to disobey the government too much.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned that there was only allowed one religious consensus in the entire country. What religion is that?
I'm not too sure what that is.
Do you know what religions are not supported or allowed in China?
I'm not too
Instead.
Can I field that question,
Yeah.
if I may? In the late 80s and early 90s, there was this cult form of Taoism called Fulang Guan, which actually proved popular with many communist officials and many of the Chinese people alike. However, unfortunately, Fulang Guan has become banned due to it becoming a main rival to the communist consensus, and fearing that it has become more of a cult. So that is generally banned in China at current. Although Fulang Guan has spread out of China into countries like Japan and other Asian countries like Taiwan, Nepal I think has one of those, and I think there's even a small centre in the south of England somewhere, and generally communism generally outlaws any form of religious practice and generally conforms to a militant, agnostic or atheist status amongst its own people.
Any other questions? Yes?
Can you fairly compare North Korea to China in terms of they're both communist countries and they're both pretty harsh on journalism restrictions?
Yeah, they're similar in the ways that, as you said, that they're harsh on the restrictions, and they don't want influences from the Western society coming over and challenging the government or the leaders' opinions.
Yes?
Do you know why it was that China was able to gain a higher position with the past Reporters Without Borders report?
Pardon, sir, can you say that again?
Do you know why China was able to gain a higher position in the last Reporters Without Borders report?
I think this is because there's been an increase in independent newspapers, but even though they're not as widely spread as the state-run ones.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much, everyone. A round of applause for us again.